A new Dr. Rifat Ismail adventure. Paranormal, Book 9, Part 1. Legend of the Pharaoh's Curse by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. Introduction. I am Dr. Rifat Ismail, ex-professor of hematology in Egyptian universities and a number of colleges abroad. I am the aging bachelor who has nearly finished my life's thread, and what's left can be counted in hours, days, or years before I catch up with eternity. And therefore I have decided to take up my pen and write my memories so that they will not end with me. What have I learned from all I've been through? I've learned that I've learned nothing. And if I could be a 20-year-old again, I would have done the same things, made the same mistakes, voiced the same trivialities. History repeats itself for one reason, which is that every time we expect it won't repeat itself and that events will take a new direction. I hear you asking, is this old guy going to waste our time with his shallow philosophy? Won't he tell us a new story? Yes, friends, I will tell you a story, but the previous lines are especially important in what I will tell you in the coming minutes, and you will soon understand. When did this story take place? It happened in early 1967. You've all heard and read about the Pharaoh curse, but none of you knows what I have known, and did not face a nightmare like, no, I won't give spoilers. I have warned you. Don't open the coffin. Come through the next pages, but with your free will. I didn't coerce you or ask you to accompany me, so there's no use in screaming. No use at all. Part 1. The Doctor. For them to have requested you in a consultancy means a paycheck with a decent number, one bearing a name such as consultancy fee or appearance fee, or some such thing. But this time, instead of receiving a check, you received the verdict of your death, a decision that cannot be repealed. 1. Special Consultancy. January 1967. Age 43. The age of adulthood and the digestion of life's experiences while you're still able to go through it. I had just returned from my nightmarish adventure of the cave guard, that adventure in which I came very close to death more than once, more than any other adventure so far. I had spent myriad nights tossing and turning in my bed from the image of a fist of moving sand, and I would awaken drenched in a cold sweat to check the phosphoric numbers lighting my alarm clock in the darkness of the room. And I would sigh, and a few minutes later I would see the Acharam standing by the door with his wavering, horrible features in the dim light from the living room. And at this point I decided to scream, but I stopped myself from doing this stupid thing at the last second, because I know all of this is an illusion. An illusion. The time has come for you to get married, Rifat. That's what my neighbors tell me frankly, and my friends advise me, and my late mother orders me. And of course, all of them see my weary face and the graying temples in the remnants of my hair, and the look of horror that has become my baseline. People get married to find someone to take care of them, or they get married to have kids, or they get married because they have nothing better to do. As for me, I will be the first to get married as an escape from seeing ghosts, monsters, and vampires. But did someone tell you I'm like other people? And in the mirror I look at this horrible thing I have turned into and ask, what woman would accept this? They all, neighbors, friends, family, tell me, there are thousands of potential brides. Yes, 1,000 bridezillas. And they respond by sighing with annoyance, saying, everybody marries someday, and for every time there is a season. And of course there will be compromise. So I protest in horror. And why would the parties compromise? What forces them to do so? Their response comes, unfortunately, you're still just a kid who won't compromise, a kid who wants everything without anything in return. That's true, and since I'm like that, why would I get married? Because everybody does it someday. Of course, the miserable bride was Hoeda. Do you remember her? The girl I met at Adil's and Alex when I was in the depths of my problem with the human cannibal. I didn't pay her much attention at first, and I started with a sort of prudish, cold emotion towards her, and we exchanged a few letters from the U.S., from Greece, from Libya, etc. And when I returned, she was still waiting. And at a semi-happy family party at Idol's house, replete with the traditional cheers made by Idol's wife, Shiham, that sounded rather like a wolf howling, she encircled my finger with a ring, and I did likewise. And we became two prisoners in a futuristic shared cell. It was an engagement party like any other. The same boring strolls in the street, the same love words I pour on her by the sea, the same red plastic cups in the same casinos, my pretending to be in love and her pretending to be shy and timid. I think we are born with a limited amount of romance and ability to love, and I have used all my quantity with Maggie, and all my trials have just become habits, like the rocket that still moves with inertia after the shutdown of all engines. Except that, and God knows, I had honest intentions of making her happy, and my wife, and I never once made her aware of the endless questions in my head. I was, as you know, living in Cairo. Therefore, I became used to traveling to Alex on Thursdays to visit my fiancée at her family's house in Al-Anfushi, and I might pass by Ado's house with or without her, according to my mood, to chat with him or complain about her, if I was, obviously, alone. And you may ask here, why didn't you just get married right away? In those happy days, marriages would be delayed not because of lack of finances or a paucity of available apartments, but rather for the luxurious reason of the engaged couple getting to know each other better. Can you imagine? Days were passing by and the wedding day was nearing, and the sun's cycle was continuing when I received the official summons. I went to open my apartment door in Dui, as usual, expecting that whoever was ringing the doorbell was someone blaming me for something, or conveying a disaster, or asking how to borrow some money which he would never return. It was January 8th, 1967, and I was making a dodgy breakfast meal when I heard the blasted doorbell. I opened the door to find a stocky, dark-featured cop with the obligatory huge mustache staring at me doubtfully, a paper in his hand. I asked him tensely, "What is it?" He responded, "They want you." He said it in a cold tone, as if he saw my question as silly. I took the paper and opened it with shaky hands, feeling like a woman receiving her divorce papers. And in it I found an official summons from the Antiquities Authority asking for my scientific opinion. But why? "But I'm a doctor, so what's my relation to—" "The police car is waiting for you downstairs, doctor." And so I found no alternative but to turn off the stove, get dressed, and catch up with the reticent visitor in the bleak-looking cop car parked in front of my building. And a look of smugness filled the eyes of the doorman and some neighbors when they saw me walking next to the cop, as if they were sure this would eventually happen as a punishment for my crimes and my ill manners and my questionable lifestyle. This lunatic cop had scandalized me to the whole neighborhood. The car drove through the streets of Cairo en route to the ministry, and I entered a vast ballroom with a large attached office with a huge desk, on top of which stood various small pharaoh statues. And there was a group of gentlemen with prestigious and dangerous looks and high-ranking officers who stared at me with doubt for no apparent reason, and the scientists with their thick glasses and silent mannerisms. "Dr. Rifat Ismail," said an elegantly dressed man with graying temples, his glasses on top of his head. He shook my hand in a friendly way and added, "I'm Dr. Ramzi Habib, Egyptology expert. Of course, you're still confused at us calling you here in such a way." I shook my head humbly, saying, "I'm a sensitive person, Dr. Ramzi, very sensitive, and cops coming in the early morning is not a light subject for sensitive people." He exploded in laughter, more than what my joke called for, and with him laughed the gentlemen surrounding us, in a clear compliment for my sake. I started getting worried. There was an atmosphere of tension covering this place, the tenseness that manifests itself in any random way, a scream, a nervous movement of the leg, inappropriate laughter. I'm not an idiot. "Actually, Dr. Rifat, we are," said Dr. Ramzi. "Please, why don't you sit? Now, can we get you anything?" "Cigarettes." One of the gentlemen reached into his pocket with a fake laugh and retrieved a metal tobacco pack and handed me a cigarette from it. And before I knew what was happening, the flames of 6 lighters held in 6 eager hands were aimed at my cigarette. Actually, we have heard a lot about, let's say, your successful tours in the paranormal world, and the case we are facing needs an expert in such things. We are moving in the dark. Do you understand? No. I said it like a cork from a wine bottle directed at his throat. He smiled, embarrassed, and added, I'll be more clear. You're a professor of hematology. That's one point. And an expert in the secrets of the metaphysical. And that's another point. Which means you are exactly the man we need. I tapped my cigarette, and someone hurried over with an ashtray to put it within my reach. This is good treatment that stirs my worries. Me, who always expects the worst. These gentlemen have some kind of disaster for me. And if we added what this comrade is saying about metaphysics, then figuring out what's happening here would not be so hard. I am going into another catastrophe of the catastrophes that await me everywhere and every time. Contemplating his fingernails, Dr. Ramsay said, There's a certain thing, kind of a monument. We want you to see it and give your full opinion, and a detailed scientific report explaining some of the mysterious phenomena surrounding this discovery. And this thing, this monument, is it a mummy? I asked. Dr. Ramsay lifted his gray eyes to me in a reverential way and shook his head, yes. And there were other scientists who investigated it before me? Actually, I cut him off, saying, Please answer, no holds barred. He sighed in surrender and said with a throaty voice, 5 scientists. And all of them died in unfathomable, mysterious circumstances? All of them. He exchanged a confused look with the men standing and then asked me, How did you know? That's how the story always goes. And I put out my cigarette and continued, And that's why you brought me in. Exactly. To be the 6th victim? He shook his head in confusion and rubbed his hands, mumbling, But to tell us the truth about what's happening. And he aimed at one of the men standing, a dark, skinny guy with thick black eyeglasses, and said, Mr. Muhammad Ragab will give you a better background on the subject. The man shook my hand with a cold hand, dried the sweat building up on his forehead, and said, Nice to meet you, Dr. Rifat. He then sat on a comfortable chair in front of me and withdrew a small notebook from his pocket, as it appeared that some points within it would help him gather his thoughts. The matter concerns a pharaoh king from the 6th dynasty, a king we know very little to nothing about, and a coincidence alone is what led us to his grave. And he wet his lips with his tongue and continued, I don't know if you have any idea about this subject, Dr. Rifat, but there is a top-secret order that I tell you here stays a secret. And why so? He replied, Even that is a secret as well. All I ask of you is to promise me. I told him, I promise, as long as it's for the good of the country. And therefore, my dear reader, please excuse me from mentioning details, for I haven't seen any of these gentlemen since that year, and none of them has exempted me from my oath. I will tell you my story, keeping to myself the bigger chunk of details, and even the name of the pharaoh himself I will not mention. Instead, we will give him a symbolic name like Acharam the First, which is, by the way, very close to his real name. This gravesite was very different than any other we have found before, said Mr. Muhammad nervously, and then continued. And what we have found in it is expected to change much of our previous understanding about pharaonic history. Even the method of mummification itself did not look familiar to us. Tensely, my interest piqued, I said, And did thieves enter this gravesite? He exchanged a questioning look with Dr. Ramsay, which said, Should I be frank? Then he sighed and answered my question. Very few, and all of them touched nothing. And the reason is? He swallowed hard, closed his notebook, and said, The owner of this grave was abnormal. In all fairness, we don't claim any superpowers for him, but the undeniable truth, the truth that's hard to comprehend, is that the grave robbers escaped the site as soon as they entered it. Their footprints in the dust, untouched for centuries, confirms this to us. And then he looked at me firmly, saying, What did these thieves see? One sneaking into a grave at night to rob it will surely not be scared of a mouse or a snake. Dr. Ramsay interrupted him, saying, Tell him about the body. Ah, said Mr. Muhammad, I was saying about thieves, as if Ramsay hadn't spoken. Curious, I asked him, what body? He tried to avoid answering by returning to talk of the graveside itself, but I insisted on understanding, which obliged him to dry his sweat and say, while giving a scolding look to Dr. Ramsay, "It's one of the thieves' body, the body of a human who tripped while trying to escape with his buddies. And strangely, on his face were terrible signs of horror. And stranger still is the fact that he did not decay despite tens of centuries since his death. And the most amazing part," and silence filled the room for a moment until he continued, "is that we couldn't find one drop of clotted blood in his veins." End of Part 1. Part 2. On the Pharaoh's Curse. "Get out, you who come in the dark and enter sneakily. Did you come to kiss this child? I won't allow you to kiss him. Did you come to take him? I won't allow you to take him from me. I have sheltered him from you with the afath plant, which hurts you, and with the onions which harm you, and with the honey which tastes sweet in the living's mouth and bitter in the mouth of the dead." A pharaoh's spell to protect the child, attributed to Isis. "So, fortunately, you have found the tomb of a pharaoh's vampire." I said it while sipping from the coffee they presented to me, while sitting at the boardroom table, ignoring the fact that all eyes were on me with curiosity. Dr. Ramsay said, with a phony smile, "We never for a second claimed that, Dr. Rifat. The existence of an intact, unrotten corpse containing no blood does not prove the existence of a vampire. It just implies something mysterious." He reached for a large file and started taking out some pictures from it and placing them in front of me. Pictures of some pharaoh's tomb, and of a beautiful sarcophagus, and of some men smiling at the camera, and of a thief's corpse looking terrified. He then pulled out 5 photographs which I recognized immediately. "These are the photos of the scientists who met 2 days ago to open the coffin. All of them are top-notch Egyptologists, science from Egypt and the rest of the world. And all of them met their demise in mysterious circumstances. And on all their faces the same mysterious expression?" Ramsay replied, "And their veins all empty of blood in the same manner." "And that's why you kept it a secret?" "Scaring the general public is not good for anyone." He then turned to one of the generals sitting with us, one not in uniform, but his sharp looks, broad shoulders, everything, spoke of him being a powerful, lifelong military man. Their features never change. "And now General Marad will speak to us on the security aspects of what happened." Scratching his neck, searching for the right words, the general then smiled and said in a reserved voice, "The whole story is a unique compilation of question marks. For all these men participated in examining the mummy. One was even the photographer of the picture you just saw. And afterwards they went home. So what happened? In 2 cases the scientist was monk-like in his dedication to his work, a bachelor who lived alone. And in the morning comes the housekeeper or the sister to find the scene we all expect. And in the other 3 cases, the scientist goes to the bathroom or stays home alone, or wakes up in the night and goes to the balcony. And then comes his wife to find the same scene. It's unnecessary to say that we did not find any footprints or fingerprints or witnesses to any of this, or evidence of a struggle or even a theft. And the forensics? Nothing except what we've just said. No trace of blood in the veins, but no holes in the neck either, if that's what you're thinking. And did the scientist suffer from any disease?" Smiling wearily, the general said, "Of course there has to be some diabetes or hypertension, etc. All just normal problems we all have. But the common finding was a shocked, tearful lady who claims incessantly that the deceased was in good health and had no complaints. Then none of them was found with the infamous fever that marks the Pharaoh's curse?" I'm not a medical expert, but I'm not certain that the answer is no. Dr. Ramsay's voice came laughingly, saying, "Here you go, Dr. Rifat, finally speaking of the Pharaoh's curse." Lighting a cigarette, I asked, curious, "Is there another way of looking at and contemplating this?" Ramsay asked, "Do you know something of this Pharaoh curse?" I looked at him, and my brain wandered through time and space. "Do Do you know something of this Pharaoh curse? Sure I know, and who amongst us doesn't know? For I, in the bleak days that followed my meeting with Dracula in 1959, hid in my Duttley apartment, behind my bedroom door strung with garlic, and amused myself by reading many books about the Pharaoh's curse. What a mood, and what a hobby! And with cups of thick black tea and cigarettes, I started realizing that this heinous myth, the myth of the Pharaoh's curse, by nature arouses debate. How did this myth start anyway? Many archaeologists had met their demise, but the story did not find its way into the public consciousness until the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb at the hands of Carter and Lord Carnarvon in 1922, after a full 6 years of struggle. Death will slaughter with its wings all who dare to disturb the Pharaoh's tomb. I am the protector of the Pharaoh's tomb who pushes thieves away using the desert heat. That is how the tomb unmistakably warned them, but they insisted to the extent of ignoring all these warning curses, insisted to the point of hiding these inscriptions from the excavation workers, so as not to terrify them. The problem with Tutankhamun is that he died so young, too young to make protection for his tomb himself. Therefore, the high priests adopt this job and use the best magical techniques and latest technology for protecting graves in those ancient times. Do you know something of this Pharaoh curse? Of course I know. I know that 13 people who opened the tomb in a formal celebration had met their demise, and the first of them was Lord Carnarvon himself, who started feeling strange with a high fever and shakes, and all the doctors were wondrous. Is it malaria, or blood poisoning, or is it... At midnight, the Lord died in Cairo. And the strange thing is that all of Cairo experienced an unexplained power outage at the exact time of his death. And after that, the sickle of death began gathering the heads of those who sullied the grave, leaving no clear explanation for their deaths. Always it's the fever that confounds the doctors, then the death that directly follows their visit to the tomb, which leaves little chance for coincidence. And here is Carter, the young secretary, dying without a clear explanation, followed by his father's suicide while mourning his son, and during the funeral procession, the horse carrying the coffin trampled a young boy, killing him. Do you know something of this Pharaoh curse? Of course I do. Even if I did not know back then what would happen after 4 years, when the British scientist Walter Emery would find a statue of Osiris during his search in Saqqara for the tomb of the genius engineer pharaoh Amenhotep, and on the same night his unexplained death right in front of his Egyptian assistant's eyes. But certainly I know what happened to the Egyptologist Champollion, who broke the code of hieroglyphics and died young, unexplainedly, immediately upon his return from Egypt. And I know that the renowned doctor Theodore Bilharz, the namesake of the disease bilharzia or schistosomiasis, had died with an unexplained fever 2 days after his visit to Luxor with the wife of Duke Ernest the First. And I know many similar stories, all of people who met their demise with a sudden fever, delirium, and shakes. And Amun's high priest deviously repeated, "Wake up from your unconsciousness, for you will defeat every one of your enemies so that they cease to exist." Then the death of Dr. Douglas Deary and the chemist Alfred Lucas after their autopsy of a pharaoh who died 3,300 years before. Do you know something of the Pharaoh curse? Of course I do. I swallowed hard and looked at Dr. Ramsay for a moment, then mumbled, "I've heard a lot about it." Rubbing his hands together, he exclaimed, "Here we are confronting a new pattern. What glory!" "So, what do you want from me?" "What a question," Ramsay replied, laughing until his eyes teared up and he brought his glasses down his nose in order to read better. Looking at the file before him, he said, "What we want from you is proof or denial of the existence of an infectious disease in this mummy, a disease which dries the blood in the veins and causes a concomitant state of terror." Mr. Muhammad Ragab looked at me curiously and asked, "Is there such a disease in medical history?" Looking at him, my mind wandered once again. 5 years ago, I was there at the conference of Dr. Azzeddin Taha, the professor in Cairo University, and he did not know me. But I was among the seated there, listening carefully to the results of the long, tiring research this renowned scientist had done while searching for the secret of the Pharaoh's curse. And he was assuring us that the fungus Aspergillus nigra, which thrives and reproduces freely in the Pharaoh's gravesites and infects all those who deal in papyrus, was the reason, in his opinion, behind a large number of deaths of archaeologists. I was there, and I liked his scientific meticulousness. Congratulating him after the conference, I promised him several visits to discuss this topic more. And I did not know it was the last time. He died in a horrific car crash shortly after the conference, and the question remains without answer. Scientists spoke about fungi and poisons that had possibly been spread by pharaohs on their tombs, and about bacteria that thrives on mummies' skin, and about the nuclear rays from the layer of uranium that the high priests had used to paint the tombs, and about the universal rays that they activated to protect the tombs. But the door remains closed, rays and horror and hearts, for no human dared to break it, and no human had found its key, and because no similar disease as far as I know. In a dry manner, Dr. Ramsey said, "But surely you will search for it." This is science, no previous orders, no assumptions. The experiment is the only measurement. In the past, scientists would find solutions for all universal problems in seconds, and the opinions of Galenos and Aristotle were enough to answer practically all questions, despite being wrong, most of it. As for the Renaissance and the rise of meticulous scientific thought, what we know is much less, but very accurate and correct. Courteously, Dr. Ramsey said, "Modern science is the disappointing truth for hope, while the old science was fun imaginings. It's saddening that copper cannot turn into gold, but it is the disappointing truth. But modern science assures you that one day you can do so if you have an advanced atomic accelerator." Ramsey's mind wandered for a moment. Then he returned to rubbing his hands together, saying, "Let's get back to our topic at hand." Those seated looked at me to see my reaction to his request. "Are you willing to inspect the mummy?" How would I answer him? These gentlemen are awaiting my answer, so don't be stingy with your opinions. Should I inspect it? Okay. I was going to suggest such to you, that I'm not courageous. It's only that I'm curious, more curious than I should be. The Brits say that curiosity kills the cat. I did not realize the truthfulness of that statement until now, and I did not picture myself as an old cat. I was, as I've told you in every story, extraordinarily naive. 3. The closed door. Why did I accept? Because there's something called curiosity, and something called embarrassment of appearing like a coward, and something called scientific integrity, and something called doing a thing because you won't trust anyone else to do it, and won't be comfortable with their conclusions. I know myself, and unlike others, I won't die that simply, and if I met my demise, that would be an unmistakable proof of the Pharaoh curse's existence. That proof that I wouldn't trust so much if the deceased was someone else. You understand me, don't you? Morning, January 21st. In the storeroom they prepped for me, I stand next to the only idiot who agreed to assist me in the task, Mr. Muhammad Ragab. Of course, there were some important people waiting outside, and here a young photographer named Nader carrying a small video camera, a few meters away from us, ready to video the full autopsy. Lighting the strong spotlight they had prepped for us, I then started the precautionary procedures I had patiently prepped, and went around the coffin with the Geiger counter to ensure the absence of any radiation, which was a possibility. Then I turned on the vacuum so that nothing would get into my lungs during the autopsy. After that, I wore gloves and donned a mask, not like the surgical masks, but rather one of those gas masks. And with that, there was only one thing left I had not accounted for: the black magic, the high priest's magic. And even, in that regard, I recited some verses from Quran, and as soon as I was done, I felt confidence filling my soul. Slowly but surely, we pushed the lid off the coffin. The previous visitors before us had stolen the outer golden inscriptions. Therefore, it was easy to see the king's mummy covered only with silk wrappings and the golden mask resembling Tutankhamun, except that his features lacked the innocence and peace that the latter's features possessed. Very slowly, I took the scalpel and made a small incision in the layers of the wrappings, and then we began removing the degraded layers laterally. It was a slow and dirty task, but we succeeded, finding, as usual, many jewels among the layers of cloth, with spells that evil unique to the Pharaohs. But what caught my attention were some particles randomly spread among the folds of the textile, like very delicate seeds, like snowflakes. And I understand nothing about precious stones, but I think these crystals have nothing to do with that. I lifted a questioning eye to my partner, who shook his head to show he did not exactly understand. He then picked a crystal and regarded it closely between pinchers and placed it in a small piece of paper to analyze it later. As for now, the most complicated part is awaiting us, which is to remove the wrappings from the mummy. Muhammad Ragab's face turned ever more yellow. What a dummy you are. The skin was gray-colored and fragile, and I took and numbered a sample from it. Then I took several samples from the veins and swept the field for histology and placed the samples in sterile test tubes, looking for any microbes. There are no organs, I said wondrously, while fighting the urge to vomit and the sweat gathering on his forehead. Ragab said, "The pharaohs would remove the internal organs because they decay quickly, and they would place them in something called the canobia vessels. And the heart, they would pull it out and put it in its place, a sacred beetle brooch." He then continued wondrously, "The weird thing here is that this mummy is from the 6th dynasty, and usually this intestinal removal goes back to the 12th dynasty. Then the deceased was ahead of his time. And here I heard the sound of someone falling. He did it, the idiot. I will never understand how a grown man allows himself to faint, especially in such crucial times like this." The door opened and Dr. Ramsay came rushing in along with 2 others, looking terrified. Yet they could not approach any further. The cameraman was the same. They asked me in unison, "Is he dead?" Putting my samples into my bag, I responded carelessly, "Of course not. It's just his vagovasal reflex is working overtime." "Should we call an ambulance for him?" "No need for that. He'll come to in a moment. And if he doesn't, an atropine injection will do the job." I then started covering the mummy and returning the jewels to their place. I asked the kid with the camera to help me cover the coffin. And since I had already closed my samples bag, I stuffed the small paper into the pack of cigarettes. I took off the gloves and threw them in the bucket of formalin, along with the rest of my surgical equipment. I then stood over the blacked-out idiot and slapped and pinched his cheeks a few times until he opened his eyes. Going out to Dr. Ramsay's office, carrying my bag, I lit a cigarette and asked for a cup of coffee, no sugar. And I started telling him about our findings, and he showed unusual interest in the absence of internal organs in this mummy from the 6th dynasty. Such people care about endless trivials. Everything surrounding this pharaoh is very strange. And what about all the spells we found? As usual, it all speaks of destroying the home and bringing destruction on anyone who dares disturb the pharaoh's rest. Strangely here, all of it depicted pictures of Set, goddess of evil for the pharaohs, although it's customary to find pictures of Osiris. And here entered Muhammad Ragab, wobbly and appearing weak. He sat in a corner chair drinking the fizzy brought to him. "You are too sensitive, my friend." "And you have none." "Thank you." Hitting buttons on the phone, Dr. Ramsay said, "When can we expect your report?" "Not before 2 weeks. I'm going to take blood and tissue samples, run tests, and then make aerobic and anaerobic cultures and wait for any bacterial growth. Then there are some complicated cultures involving fungal growth. Putting the phone to his ear, awaiting a response, he said, "As we told you, complete secrecy. We'll put the health ministry's labs under your discretion so there's no chance for questions and curiosity within the college. Hello? Dr. Shacker? How are you doing? You should receive the samples within the hour. Thank you." He put down the phone and looked at me. "We don't yet know your general opinion on this whole matter." "I have no opinion. And up until now, science does not know of a disease that causes what happened to your scientist and that thief." "Maybe it's a new disease?" "Maybe, and if so, we would have the honor of spreading that disease after having lain dormant all these centuries." Dr. Ramsay smiled mysteriously and said, stressing each letter, "From this moment on, you're the #1 candidate to be this mummy's next victim, Dr. Rifat. And if things go as I expect, we won't find you in our world in 2 weeks. Does that not terrify you?" "It's only one death, the date and way specified. So if my hour has not come, the mummies from every dynasty would not be able to harm me, even if they still had their guts." His eyes narrowed further, and he said quietly, "You're right, but you're forgetting that which is crueler than death, the horror, the unexplainable horror that turns your life to hell and makes you wish to die." His eyes became fox-like as he repeated, "The horror, my friend, the horror." 9. Part 3. Like in the movies, his words kept echoing in my mind while I was driving to Alexandria. The horror, my friend, the horror. It was Thursday, my weekly visit to Hoeda, my miserable fiancé, and the headlights reflected in my rear-view mirror as the sad blue sky foretold of an early winter night, and the damp electric air foretold of a coming storm, and Kulthum was singing on the radio. The horror, my friend, the horror. "You stupid donkey!" The shout came from a driver I had almost hit while taking a right turn. I was totally absent-minded. Only that shout brought me back to reality. And, of course, there is no other stupid donkey like me. Steeling my nerves, I gripped the steering wheel more tightly. I can't leave any chance for coincidence to connect my death with the desecration of Acharam's tomb. I won't end up just another line added to the books on the Pharaoh's curse. And I won't turn into another question mark that begs curiosity about the world in years to come. If I die, let it be because Acharam's curse is pursuing me, and not because I'm an idiot donkey like that uncivilized driver claims. The horror, my friend, the horror. I contemplated the dark fields on both sides, and I had the notion that traveling by car was extra exhausting. What's wrong with the train? Kafra Ziyat Station, Ite El Barud. No, I won't sleep. I'm exhausted and my day was really busy, but I'll stay awake. Mr. Acharam needs superpowers to pursue me on this quick trip. This idea really reassures me. Finally, Alexandria, the bride of the Mediterranean, my adoration of which overcomes me. "Rifat, have you not noticed this is the 1,000th time you speak of vampires?" asked Hoeda with some resentment as we sat in that warm cafeteria, listening to tango music and sipping hot cocoa. "So what? Talking about vampires is so interesting but it's the 1,000th time." She said it while smiling kindly and then continued, "Don't you think this is abnormal for a fiancé to take his beloved to romantic places, to speak to her about Dracula's mummy and the werewolf's finger and that Norwegian who was devoured in a single bite by the Loch Ness monster? But these are interesting stories, and I really like them. And last week you told me about the dead in Jamaica who leave their graves, and the cave guard who breaks his victims' necks, and these are my loveliest memories." She shouted so loudly that it grabbed the attention of those around us and sent blood rushing to my ears. "But I hate it. All of it gives me nightmares." Nervously, I lit a cigarette and was prepared to direct some harsh words at her, but reconsidered and settled for mumbling while burying my face in my cup of cocoa. "Truth is, you're bored with me." I was going to tell her about my adventure this morning with dissecting the mummy, to impress her, but she poured cold water over the fire of my enthusiasm. It's easy for a guy to hate a girl who is not interested in what interests him. Softening, she said, "You smoke too much." "That's how I am." Reaching for my pack of cigarettes, she threw it into her purse despite my protesting gaze. That action which every fiancé must take with her groom, even if she likes the smell of tobacco, and even if she is a nicotine addict. She must repeat the same advice that has become sacred for any fiancé. "I'll be the guardian of your health, and you won't dare to object." Then, more cheerfully, she said, "And now, let's go to the movies." The Native Americans shouted their frightful screams as the sheriff, James Stewart, steadily emptied his rifle into their chests. And after a few shots, it seemed clear that he had shot everyone in the movie, including the director himself. Bored, I yawned and continued watching the movie as she whispered in my ear, "I wish you were like him." "And kill Indians?" "No, just to be handsome and brave like him." I almost responded to her with a reply that would make her cry. But then I remembered that kindness is a quality of the noble man, so I said, "I'll try, I promise you, but tomorrow, God willing." And I resumed watching the movie's events in misery. Turning my head, I looked at those seated around us, and they were only a few because we were the only crazy people who would go to the movies in this coming storm. And in the row behind us was a man sitting alone, his facial features unclear in the darkness. There's something strange about that man. And despite the near-complete darkness, I could see his facial silhouette and the direction of his gaze. This man was not looking at the screen at all, but instead stared at us with abnormal concentration. I told myself it's another curious guy who is interested in watching a man and woman exchanging whispers, and went back to following the movie absent-mindedly. Then suddenly I turned my head towards him. He was staring at us with the same fixed concentration and insistence. This is weird. Really weird. Well, either I'm imagining, due to my tense nerves, or he is indescribably rude, or he was assigned by someone I don't know to watch us, or... On the screen, the dynamite exploded, and the Indians scattered flying from the blast. I took the chance and turned my head quickly to see the man's face in the flash from the screen, but I did not find him. When did he leave? How did I not notice? And how did he leave his seat so quickly, find his feet, and feel his way in the darkness? There is something unsettling about this. "What's wrong?" Hoeda asked, while handing me some caramel. But I didn't answer. "You're jealous of James Stewart?" What a fool you are. She still thinks of this topic and thinks my absent-mindedness is a proof of the deep wound she caused me when she left me for James Stewart. Trying the candy, I told her, "I'm jealous of the sheriff and not the actor." "And what's the difference?" "The latter pretends to be brave, but I'm sure he would die of fear if an enthused mouse touched his foot." She laughed and I laughed, and then she handed me a chocolate bar and went back to watching the movie, while I dissolved into an ominous state, thinking of what may happen in the coming days. And when I looked back, I found that man sitting in the same seat. "Come on, let's go." "But," she protested, "what's wrong? He didn't save the singer yet." "Oh, I'm sure he'll save her. What's important now is to leave, because I'm not very comfortable with that man sitting behind us." She looked lightly behind and then asked, wondering, "Which man? There's no one in the theater but us." On the staircase of her home, I shook her hand. She thanked me for the evening and invited me up for a cup of tea and to meet her mom, my future mother-in-law. But I apologized to her that the hour was late, and that I had to return to Cairo on Friday morning. And I promised her a better evening next week. And as soon as I heard her heels ascending the stairs, I turned, left the building door ajar, and returned to my car, going back to the boarding house where I typically spent my Thursday nights since our engagement. Our long-distance relationship is a problem, but I hoped that after marriage she would move and live with me in Cairo, especially as her mother was in good health and there should not be a problem leaving her alone in Alex near her other daughter, Siham, and her husband, Adil, my friend who had gotten me into all of this. On Friday morning, I started back to Cairo. And as if it were waiting for me, as soon as I opened my apartment door, the phone rang. That insistent ring which tells of the caller dying with worry. Lifting the receiver slowly, I told the person on the other end, "Hello?" "Dr. Rifat." Finally. The voice sounded familiar, but I could not recognize who it was. "It's Ramzi Habib." "Ah, how are you, doctor?" I replied. "Where were you all night?" "I was traveling, but what happened?" Am I imagining things, or was Ramzi intentionally staying silent? Seconds passed like centuries. I could only hear his breathing and, in the distance, the sound of the Quran reader in preparation for the Friday prayer. "Dr. Ramzi, what happened?" Sighing with embarrassment, he said, "Mr. Muhammad Ragab." In an emotional voice, realizing what had happened, I asked, "Dead?" "Oh, the same mysterious death. His wife took the kids out, and when she returned, he was still sitting in front of the TV, in the same position, but I don't understand any of this. Not a single word. In the same way, and so quickly, that enthusiastic young man who just yesterday spoke of Acharam the First and accused me of being insensitive, today is a corpse, eyes open and blood dried up." While Dr. Ramzi was still speaking, autopsy, and as usual, nothing. Then intensely he asked, "Are you listening?" "Of course." "Then I beg of you to be careful. Don't stay alone for a second. Why don't you come spend the next few days with me?" "Thank you, but caution does not prevent fate." I then hung up the phone, went to the kitchen distractedly, made myself some coffee, and, like in any typical Egyptian home on a Friday, lit some incense to fill my apartment with its endearing scent. And then I started prepping for the prayer at the nearby mosque when the phone rang again. This time it was that long, insistent ringing that indicates a disaster coming from another governorate. "Hello?" Adil's firm voice screamed, "Where are you, damn you?" What a greeting to a friend. "Where did you take the girl?" he asked. "What girl?" "Howeida, you idiot, Howeida. We spent the darkest night of our lives, and at dawn I sent 10 of my men looking for you both, everywhere in the city, but no use. And I've called you so many times. Where is she, Rifat? Rifat, answer my question." The phone dropped to the floor, and Adil's steely voice shouted repeatedly, "Where is she, Rifat?" Part 2. The Girl. Being meticulous in choosing your life partner is very important. You have to know his habits, his friends, his dreams, his secrets, and most importantly, you have to make sure there's no angry mummy pursuing him. 4. New Beginning. Howeida said he was soft like a dream, mysterious like the night, sad like the dusk, and he loved me. I first met him at my sister Siham's home, and she had told me some things about him, including that he was 40 and that he was friends with Adil, her husband, since they were young, and that he had gotten out of a failed love story with a dumb Scottish girl. And there I saw him and studied his features, of course without him noticing, and he was everything of handsomeness, not ugly nor very good-looking. There was a streak of deep sadness in his withering eyes, behind his glasses, and bitter wrinkles on the sides of his mouth and wise forehead, and his hair was going, which gave him an endearing, fatherly look. Of course, he wasn't the knight in shining armor, nor would he ever be, but he would be a husband, and a loyal one by nature. And in a sweet gesture, Adil offered for him to take me home, a gesture Rifat accepted willingly. And throughout the drive to my home he was silent, but I felt 1,000 poems and 1,000 dreams fighting to fall from him. And he was smoking really heavily. I didn't let him drive me to my building, but only to the beginning of my street, because I didn't want him to see my humble home, at least not that first time. And after that, I met him at a crafty Cairene sculptor named Azit, who was his neighbor. Adil had invited me to attend an exhibition with him, and had told me we would surely meet Rifat there. I'm not that interested, girlfriends. Trust me, sisters, all I want from you is to help me with my makeup, and to lend me the best of your dresses, and to notice with a critic's eye every little thing in my outfit and looks. I don't care about him, girls. Even if he interrupted his talk with the sculptor, surprise in his eyes, and shook Adil's hand with enthusiasm and started rambling on about Michelangelo and Auguste Rodin. I wasn't interested in the topic at all, but I listened carefully and hung on every single word. And from that moment, I knew we would marry. Adil warned me, what a kind brother, that this Rifat was really strange and traveled a lot and had a strong, intimate interest in the horror stories that our mothers would tell us when we were kids. Thus, I didn't worry much when he left me and traveled to the U.S. And I wasn't worried by his sudden trips to Greece, and I wasn't upset with his tour in Libya, as long as his sweet letters and postcards came to me from every place he went. Honestly, girlfriends, he has changed a lot. His hair became ever wider, and his wrinkles doubled, and a strange look reflected in his eyes. Instead of the prior sadness, it became a frightened look, the look of a trapped cat begging to be freed. While braiding my hair, my sister said to me, "It's time." "Time for what?" "This is taking too long," she said. "What do you mean?" "The legend of the indecisive lover?" And I felt her hands become more rough as she finished my braids, so I said, "He seems scared of being tied down." Taking another pin from her mouth, my sister said, "Men are like big children. They never marry unless someone asks them to." "And you want me to ask?" Shrewdly, she said, "Put him at the crossroads. Either he asks for your hand or stops with all the letters and friendliness." And that is what happened, sisters. It was a dreamlike night at my sister's place, surrounded by the angelic faces of children, and his gold ring gripped my finger like a newborn. And I started to know him better, and his visits became more regular at my home, which I no longer cared that he see. And his polite sweetness to my old, kind mother. Only one thing bothered me about him. He was not good at expressing his feelings, and he had nothing but endless, horrible stories about the vampire mummy and the demon caller and a Greek devil that turned humans into marble. I would listen to him, feigning interest, but as soon as night fell, all the ghosts would gather in my bedroom, and I would spend the night curled in a fetal position, cursing him internally. These stories became a basic part of his character, to the point that several times I felt like he himself was a demonic creature of the kind he always spoke about. As for another thing that troubled me, his bitter sarcasm. He was sarcastic about everything and would see a repetitive boredom in even a thrilling situation. Therefore, I used to ask him wonderingly, "Why do you deal with people as if they are a silly joke you've heard many times?" "Because they are." He would then light yet another cigarette and say, "All of their talk has been said before, and all of their life events have happened before, but they've forgotten." Other than that, I think Rifat Ismail was not so bad. When I gave him my frank opinion about his talk of vampires, he seemed unhappy, because he took it for granted that I loved such talk. We were sitting in a cafeteria, sipping on hot cocoa, while his ever-present cigarette sent poisonous smoke from between his fingers. So I decided to take a proactive approach. Reaching for his pack of cigarettes, I hid it in my purse and said in a cheerful way, trying to assuage the tense atmosphere, "I'll be the guardian of your health, and you won't dare to object." And for that fiery look in his eyes, I suggested we go to the movies. It seemed poetic to me that amidst these storms and impending rains, we traveled the streets together, and sat alone in the warm cinema watching the colorful dreams on the screen while the chaotic weather ruled the streets outside. The movie starred James Stewart, and it's about a handsome and brave sheriff who loves a pretty singer, but the Native Americans kidnap her, so he insists on getting her back from them and shoots a lot of bullets for her. How I wished Rifat had 10%, just 10% of the handsomeness and bravery and tenderness of that sheriff, but he became more miserable when I told him about that wish. He kept turning around looking behind for a reason I didn't know, and suddenly asked me to get up to leave, which surprised me. I didn't imagine his jealousy of the movie star would bother him to that extent. But what's up? He didn't save the singer yet. He said something I didn't really understand about a guy sitting behind us annoying him, and of course I found no one in the back rows, or in the whole cinema. And so we went on watching the movie while I wondered what was wrong with him. End of Part 3. Part 4. The cold was eating through our bones as we headed back through the dark streets to my home. and he was in an unbelievably bad mood. But he didn't forget, in an obvious challenge to me, to buy a pack of cigarettes from a small supermarket that hadn't yet closed at this late hour. In front of my building door, he said he hoped I had a nice evening and wished me good night. "Aren't you going to come up and have some tea?" "No, it's too late." "At least to say goodbye to my mom?" I prompted. "Give her my greetings. I have reasons that demand my traveling tomorrow at 9 a.m., which is early for a Friday." With kindness, I asked him, "The same boarding house?" "Where else?" "Okay, well, I promise you, dear, that everything will be better and more stable very soon." Shaking his head tenderly, he stood by the door waiting for me to go up the stairs in the dim light, and then I could not see him and so realized he had left. My flat is on the 3rd floor, and since my building is fairly old, the stories are quite high and the dry-rotted stairs steep and seemingly infinite. I cast about in my purse for my keys, and then I slowly lifted my head and saw a man standing on the 3rd floor landing above, covered in shadows, his arms crossed on his chest, waiting patiently as if expecting me. Who is he? Is it one of the neighbors? Impossible. They're not given to standing on the stairs at midnight. And what exactly does he want? I couldn't see his face covered in shadows, but something told me that I shouldn't anyways. Mysterious, unexplained horror ran through my veins, making me reluctant to recognize this stranger's face. My heart jumped like a frog. Should I go up, come what may? Impossible. Should I scream? Maybe the whole thing is unimportant, and then I would look unbelievably foolish in front of the neighbors. Either way, screaming would take away the remnants of my sanity. Then go down quickly and catch up with Rifat and ask him to come up the stairs with me. I hurried down the stairs, trying not to break my high heels. I did not dare lift my eyes to see if the stranger was following me down the stairs. The cold night air, the streets, the dim red taillights of Rifat's car as it drove away to a place from which he would not hear me. "You idiot, Rifat! What a nitwit! Why didn't you come up with?" The only thing left for me now is to wake up our neighbor, Fathia, on the 1st floor so she could awaken her son, Hisham, who looks like a gorilla, so he could go upstairs and deal with this dude who has nothing better to do than scaring delicate young girls. Hisham would enjoy tremendously beating up this rude man. At the entrance of the building, I found the same figure of a man in the darkness, but this time waiting at the bottom of the stairs. 5. Escape to nowhere. Wake up from your slumber, for you will defeat every one of your enemies so that they cease to exist. On the street, I walked quickly. I could have run, but I was worried, just as I was worried to scream before, as it would drain my strength and nerves and terrify me. The fading street lamps, a mangy dog looking at me, wondering, and some rangy, disheveled cats fighting over some garbage, with their wide eyes asking what's happening. I wished I could tell them. Fortunately, the corner supermarket owner, Uncle Galal, was there, about to close his shop where I used to buy candy and mints when I was a child, and would buy henna for my hair when I was a teenager. The same grocer from whom Rifat had, just 15 minutes ago, bought a pack of cigarettes. I entered the safety of the shop, pale-faced and limbs cold. The smell of the dry cheese, olives, and alcohol, this mix so sweet to the soul, and kind old Galal's smiling, wrinkled face. "Uncle Galal!" "Did the doctor leave already?" "Yes, could I get a soda?" He shook his head, wondering. "In this cold?" "Well, if you'd like, but why did you come alone at this hour?" I swallowed hard and began telling him of my short adventure in a shaky, incoherent voice, but he understood my meaning. Therefore his face reddened with anger. He grasped his cheese knife, waving it in anger. "I'll take you home, and just let that son of a try to stand in our way, and he'll only have himself to blame." "He's coming himself." That's how I interrupted him as I pointed to the dark streets and circle of light outside. Screaming hysterically, I saw the sinister shadow coming towards the supermarket, hands in his pocket. I shook uncontrollably, but the grocer was feverish with chivalry. He went towards the stranger, waving his knife and grabbing him by the neck while swearing, "I know how to deal with guys like you who enjoy scaring innocent girls." The man tried to break free, feigning misunderstanding, that there was some mistake, but the grocer was still eager. And here a smile invaded my face. Uncle Galal, that's not the man. But his face oozes crime. I didn't see his face as he approached, but now I do. He's our neighbor's husband. And, by the way, he's a supermarket inspector. Galal then started apologizing to the innocent man who had come to buy a pack of cigarettes from his shop, the only shop open at this late hour, and kept telling him apologetically that he didn't know and was just trying to protect an innocent girl like myself. Proudly, the man said, while straightening his clothes, "If you're going to threaten with a knife everyone who tries to buy a pack of cigarettes, then don't expect your supermarket to be successful." He then stuffed what he bought in his pocket and left with annoyance. For a few seconds there was silence. The old grocer started slowly closing his shop, though my patience was running out. He then linked arms with me, as if taking his daughter to school on her first day, and said, short of breath from the cold, "Let's go." He was shaking, coughing, and breathing hard. I felt strong empathy for him. We walked very slowly, a few steps towards my house, which he knew very well. Suddenly, I noticed the man. For sure, it's him this time. He was standing under one of the street lights with his arms crossed on his chest, the shadows covering his face, just as I had seen him in the stairwell of my building. "It's him this time." I said it, and my arm tightened on my handbag. He said, "Wait here." He said it sternly and then walked extra slowly towards the challenging shadow, walked until he drew very close, and then I heard his angry voice saying, "You, mister, stop messing around and playing with people's—" Why did he stop talking? Why did his face freeze in such a weird way? Why is he swaying? Why is he holding his chest with his hands? But even worse, why is he falling to the ground? Something in the stranger's face had seriously freaked him out. He freaked out so much that his weak heart succumbed. Or it's some kind of hypnosis, or a blackout. What's important is, either way, I have lost my only bodyguard. I have to escape. I have to. But where to? I started running, hearing nothing but my high heels on the broken asphalt. I was wearing a coat, so the cold didn't bother me much. There was a dog perturbed by my running. It howled, and it seemed like it was thinking of pursuing me. But for some reason I don't know, it started moaning and running away, its tail between its legs. I didn't dare look behind me. But I stopped once and took off my shoes, and with anger I broke the heels off in order to run more easily. This was no time for me to look elegant. "Rifat, I wish you were here to explain what's happening." Entering one of the side alleys, I started running, and running. A building with number 12 written in chalk was my friend Hind's place. The most important thing is that the entrance not be locked. Thank God it's open. More important still is that I not find that stranger standing there waiting for me. I don't know how, but I understood instinctively that this matter was something supernatural and something paranormal. Something more mysterious than just some bum following me. But he wasn't there. I started knocking on the door hysterically, tears gathering on my cheeks and the sound of my crying ever increasing. The sound of a lock being opened, and the old apartment door revealing the face of Hind's father wearing PJs, and behind him his startled wife. In confused sentences, I related what was happening. They took nothing from my talk except that my mom was dying, but between tears I gathered my strength and aimed downstairs, saying, "A man from our street. He's not stopping. The grocer." The father looked in astonishment at his daughter, who put her arms around me and sat me at the table while her mom brought me a cup of water. Finally, I regained the ability to speak, so I started telling them the whole story from the time I left Rifat's until I came here. "Is he still standing there?" "Maybe. I don't know." Heading to the window, the father opened it and peered into the night outside. "Is that the man, my dear?" Rising nervously, I peeked from behind his shoulder. Yes, it was him, standing under one of the street lamps with his arms crossed, as was his habit. He prefers the light coming from above, so as to hide his face in the shadows. "Yes, it's him, Uncle, it's him." Closing the window, the father began unbuttoning his pajama top while mumbling something about going down to face that bastard and find out what he wanted exactly. He asked his wife to hand him a heavy mallet from the kitchen to be used as an improvised weapon. But I clung to him in fear, saying, "No, please, you haven't seen what happened to the grocer when he saw the man." But, "Please, I beg of you, I'm safe here. Please just let me stay with you until the morning." He seemed relieved, for he, and I don't blame him, did not truly want to go through that situation. Also, he did not have a phone from which to call the police. "And your mom? How do we tell her?" Shaking, I said, "Leave her. She won't suffer any danger except for worry, but she will forgive me in the morning when she finds out what happened." And with that, Hen's mom offered me some sandwiches and a cup of tea. Then Hind brought me one of her nightgowns and led me to her bedroom, acting cheerful and asking me subtly about Rifat. She sat on the bed cross-legged and started showing me her engagement photo album, criticizing this girl and that woman, while I was totally absent-minded. Snakes of worry were eating through my heart. And you can understand that, sister. How does my mom feel, and what is she saying right now, when her only unmarried daughter is so late in coming back at 3 a.m.? Poor Rifat. You'll be the first suspect in the case of my disappearance. But I didn't know that my mom wasted no time. She had called Adil in Siham's home and started crying hysterically, in response to which Adil cursed Rifat, saying I should never have trusted a nutcase like him. As for Siham, she mentioned that her left eye had been twitching involuntarily for 3 days, which was enough proof that I was dead or, at best, dying in some hospital. Adil went searching the city in his car, as he did not know my girlfriend's addresses nor where Rifat was spending his night. He even took 10 strong policemen from his station to search for me, under every stone in the city and on top of every morgue table and hospital bed. All this while I was sitting on the bed, listening to Hen's blabbering. I woke up at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. I freaked out and jumped out of the bed as if stung, hastily dressing and grabbing my bag while running outside. And in the living room, I found the small family sitting at the dining table having breakfast, their faces lit with friendliness and refreshment. "Come, dear, wash your face and then come have breakfast." "But I'm late." Sipping the rest of his tea while perusing the headlines in the newspaper, then pulling his glasses down to his nose, the father said, "You're not leaving before breakfast. I'll take you home myself." And so I went to the bathroom and washed my face in front of the mirror. What tired features and puffy eyelids. Last night's events were really tough. May God never show you a night like this, girlfriend. Going back to the dining table, I sat as Hind smashed some beans in a bowl for me. She then added some oil and said, "You slept a lot." "Like a log. And I really am very thankful to you." With open appetite, I started eating the beans and toast while the sweet smell of incense in the kitchen tickled my nose. The scent came from the kitchen where Hind's mom was preparing the breakfast. From afar, I could hear the sound of Quran being recited in preparation for the Friday prayers. How kind and sweet is the Egyptian family. Hind's father looked at me over his glasses, asking, "Ready to go?" "Yes, please." And I kissed her hand and her mother, who made sure to send 1,000 greetings to my mother with a recommendation to me to hurry up and get married so as never to be alone any more. And then I walked behind the father, going back to my home. And in the daylight, the alley seemed to me such a sweet and happy place. Then something small grabbed my attention, something underneath the streetlight where the stranger was standing last night. There was the corpse of a dog, his features clenched as if he suffered tremendously as he died. And a few steps away, the bodies of 4 dead rats were scattered. "What killed that dog?" asked the father in wonder, though the question seemed silly to me, indescribably silly. 6. Some danger. When I reached my home, I found a scene that exceeded all of my expectations. For as soon as my sister Siham thanked Hind's dad for bringing me home, and as soon as she shut the door, she turned into a rabid wolf. Squeezing my arm with her fingers, she asked me what happened, and she clenched her teeth in an animalistic way. And my mom was in a worse state still. while my neighbors, whom you girls know, mothers of Sharif and Bulbul and Sanat, those hags, sat clucking and mocking with spite. Moments later, Adil entered, and his greeting to me was even sweeter still. "Where were you, young lady?" 2 hours later, Rifat barged in, screaming frantically, "I drove her here personally, I swear." It was rather difficult to tell the story of last night, but I told it while shaking. As soon as I finished, silence prevailed for a few seconds. Nervously, while patting me gently on the shoulder, Siham asked, "What do you all think?" Distractedly, Adil said, "Attempted assault, and we see dozens of these on a daily basis." "And what do you think, Dr. Rifat?" While lighting a cigarette, Rifat replied mysteriously, "One question seems to bother me. Is it linguistically correct to ask who attacked her or what attacked her?" "Is there a difference?" "Linguistically, yes, a huge difference." Happy with his intelligence, I shouted smugly, "Yes, yes, I myself sensed something strange in all of this." Putting one leg over the other, Adil asked wonderingly, "What's so unusual about all of this?" Contemplating his smoke rings, Rifat said, "Ponder with me on what has happened, Adil. There is a person waiting for her at the door, and she cannot see his face. A person who knows her address and the time she returns. Someone who goes down the stairs with lightning speed, without any noise whatsoever. A person who follows her through the streets, and the dogs don't chase him but rather run away from him. And as soon as the miserable grocer sees his face, he falls directly to the ground. Do you find all of this familiar in your case files?" He then looked at me victoriously and continued, "I even met him in the theater last night, and whenever I tried to see his face, I couldn't find him. I told you so, and you thought I was crazy." I was distracted. Here they all are, all of them sitting here for me. How sweet they are, so unbelievably sweet. They all spent their night awake, even Rifat, who drove back here directly as soon as he reached Cairo. Oh, I love you all. I can now leave this whole problem, and even myself, to them. The shrewd Siham will suggest something, and Rifat, with his wisdom and experience, will find the answer. And brave and powerful Adil will protect me from any harm. So don't envy me, girls. I will pray to God that you all be as happy as me." Adil was saying, "You're a master in deducing wrongly, Rifat, and your talent in extracting horrific results from obvious things is well known. Remember the mazes we went through together with the human cannibal?" While putting out his cigarette, Rifat said with embarrassment, "Before you wrong me, let me tell you something I did yesterday by official order from the Antiquities Authority. But please, I would like the women to leave us for a bit." "You got it." When she finished boiling the eggs, Siham handed me the hot kettle and a tray of cups, and whispered deviously, "He really loves you." My cheeks reddened like tomatoes, and I whispered back, "I don't know." "Well, he was dying with worry for you. For the man who leaves the phone dangling and rushes to jump in his car to drive back to Alex just 15 minutes after returning from there is a man in love. Watch out, fool, you're going to drop the teapot." And we headed to the living room, where the two men continued their long conversation. Adil was tensing up. As for Rifat, he looked like someone defending a lost case. "And thus you find me in a true bind." "And why Hoeda specifically?" asked Adil, "since he was after you?" "I don't know, but I'm sure the intended target of what happened to her was me, and then, sensing my presence, he stopped his talk short. I told them that we had prepped a light meal, as neither one of them had eaten since the morning. They sat at the table and began eating like men deprived, and courteously Adil said, "Hoeda, certain reasons compel me to stay with you and your mom, for this week at least." "And Siham?" "She'll go back home for the kid, or they can both stay with us here. It's all the same, but I prefer the first option." "And Rifat?" He stopped chewing and gave Rifat a meaningful look and whispered, "No place for him here. He'll return to Cairo, and should be careful not to be alone." I didn't understand a single word. and my stomach clenched, feeling the intense atmosphere that foreshadowed danger, the atmosphere dripping from Idol's every word. Midnight. I sleep in my locked room while Idol waits half asleep in the living room, his gun holstered and his feet resting on a wooden chair in front of him, and next to him the radio playing one of Abdul Wahhab's songs. My mom sleeps in her room, broken from tiredness, and from the threshold of the door sneaks the dim living room light, and the tick-tock of the clock, and the sound of my even breathing as I lay between sleep and wakefulness. Is it the mice? For sure it is. The sound of something rough rubbing against the lock of the wooden window. The sound grew louder with a strange insistence. I could swear it was the sound of fingers feeling the window frame. I got out of my bed and tiptoed to the window, and in the dim light I could see that sharp blade entering between the slats of the shutters, trying to lift the lock. I tried screaming, but my voice stopped short in my throat. I could only run towards the door, to the living room, shaking Idol to wake him. Jumping up as if stung, Idol retrieved his gun and rushed to the bedroom behind me and turned on the light. And in front of our frightened eyes, the blade continued trying to lift the lock on the window. Either this thief is a fool or he's not deterred by the light. Idol put his finger to his mouth to silence me, then went towards the window, and very carefully he lifted the lock and opened it in a dramatic move. Was that one of hell's doors opening? I only remember screaming frantically, and Idol pulling me out of the room as violently as he could, while that unbelievable and indescribable thing flowed into the room. Despicable, sticky. It had 2 human hands. Other than that, I don't remember. Together we ran to the living room, violently locking my bedroom door on that thing so it couldn't come out to us. I screamed, "Oh my God!" Idol roared, shaking, and my mom woke from her sleep and emerged from her bedroom rubbing her eyes. "What's happened, kids? Have you gone mad?" From between his teeth, Idol said while snapping the magazine into his gun, "A nightmare. Something so heinous, the likes of which I have never seen before, entered from the bedroom window." "And you didn't shoot it?" "I didn't dare. The rules of the material world do not apply to it. And I couldn't get my head around it to..." And here we heard that sound of friction. This thing, or person, trying to open the bedroom door. It won't be long before it succeeds, and then... the loud ringing of the phone. I ran to answer, yet my eyes did not leave my bedroom door. I could hear Rifat's voice screaming, "Howeida, is my pack of cigarettes still in your handbag?" "Are you joking, Rifat? You have no idea what's happening here." "Please, listen to me. Get rid of the pack immediately. Throw it from the window. There's no time to explain." "But my bag, with what's inside it, is still in the room with him." "With whom?" I didn't know what to say, so I stood staring at the bedroom door, which started to give way. Idol, muscles flexed, did not know what to do. And clutching her head, my mom didn't understand any of this. The door gave way. Like someone possessed, Rifat repeated into the phone, "With whom, Howeida? With whom?" Part 5. Chapter 3. The Friend. Yes, Western psychologists believe in biorhythm, and believe there are people created to fall into trouble caused by their stupidity. As for our friend Rifat Ismail, it's different. Trouble pursues him whether he commits stupid acts or not, and whether his biorhythm is at the peak or rock bottom. 7. The Mummy That Confused Us. Dr. Ramsey said, "I did not expect all this to happen, but it did." The nightmare started in the last days of December 1966. Some of our men found an original vase that must have dated back to the 6th dynasty, and this was in the city of Luxor on the east bank of the Nile. As you know, friends, the pharaohs used to bury their dead on the west side of the Nile, and they would describe the deceased in a polite inscription which read, "Gone westward." Therefore, I did not expect in the excavations to find an entrance to a tomb in this place, so far away from the famous Valley of the Kings. But that's what happened. And from the first moment, we realized that this burial site differs from everything we're accustomed to. the inscriptions at the entrance, and the warning spells which read, "The one with deep-seated evil inside him will spread horror in the hearts of the intruders." And even the steps leading downward, and the engraved ceilings, were all in an unfamiliar pattern, in addition to an abnormal number of depictions of the Pharaoh's goddess of evil set. All of this carried a despicable, ominous nature. Without hesitation, all of our scientists agreed that they had never heard of this Pharaoh, whom we will call here, for purposes of secrecy, Acharam the First, which is an unusual name for an Egyptian pharaoh, but is very close to his real name. We transported the mummy to a special storeroom within the Antiquities Authority, and on New Year's Eve, 5 of our best Egyptologists gathered to study and photograph the coffin, and then they opened it in the presence of a limited number of experts. Actually, we were overly hasty. We didn't stop for a second to question the secret of grave robbers avoiding looting this gravesite in particular. Did they know something we did not? Yes, I don't remember there being any footprints, but there were rushed and interrupted footprints in the dust, as if whoever went in hurried to escape for reasons we do not know. And I don't remember there being a corpse lying on its side with horrified features, as if it had seen the devil himself. But we interpreted this as we saw fit, and we said that the air devoid of humidity helped preserve this corpse for all these centuries. And I don't have to tell you that finding the thief's corpse undecayed after at least 2,000 years seemed so thrilling and astonishing to us. And so, friends, we opened the coffin, and carefully our scientists removed the golden inscriptions and did not fail to notice that strange and horrific warning that constantly haunted them. We began to conclude that this pharaoh was outcast by the priest for some reason or another, or perhaps he found his only chance to take revenge on him after his death. And we also realized that he was practicing black magic on a wide scale, and there is a distinct possibility that he protected his own tomb himself. The important thing is that our experts wrote a full report on the status of the coffin and their best guess on this pharaoh's placement in ancient Egyptian history, and included a number of photographs in their file. We were just about to remove the layers of wrappings to examine the mummy itself when the deaths happened quickly, like a colony of flies sprayed with a strong pesticide, or a fish tank polluted by a bottle of kerosene, or any other analogy as you like. The deaths of 5 scientists within 1 week. No way this is a coincidence. The Interior Ministry assigned a high-level delegation of top experts in criminal investigation, headed by General Murad Sharif, to investigate these deaths. The consensus was that this was a conspiracy by a foreign country with the goal of terrorizing or preventing our scientists from speaking. At that time, the memory of the Israeli rockets sent to assassinate the German rocket scientists was fresh in our minds. Author's note: this happened as well during the development of the Cairo and Zafir rockets by the Egyptian scientists being aided by Israel. Despite that, they failed to gather all the threads of the story, and no one dared to utter the words "Pharaoh curse," but we were pretty sure that was the only explanation. During a visit to his office, I asked General Murad, "Did you find any leads?" He smiled in exhaustion and said, "What do you want? When a man dies in a room with door and windows locked from the inside, without proof he committed suicide, at that point it's out of our hands." "You mean—" I started. "I only mean what I said." He then opened a file in front of him and, putting on his glasses, said, "Here's the coroner's report. As you can see, no evidence of violence, no wounds, no bruising, only an expression of terror on his face, and what?" Smiling cruelly, he stared at me from over his glasses and said, "No trace of blood in their veins." "And no coagulation?" "Not a single clot. I personally think that this matter more likely involves a vampire rather than a normal criminal." I felt goosebumps invading the pores of my skin. Seemingly one thing connects the 5 victims, and that means we did not just find the grave of any unknown pharaoh, but it was... I sat in my home thinking distractedly about what I should do. I can't refuse to continue because it's my job. nor can I go further in this huge danger because it's my life at stake. The meaning of what's happening here is that whoever deals with this mummy inches toward a catastrophe. But I don't have the clearance to obstruct further scientific research, nor do I have the authority to return the mummy to its tomb and lock it. Grabbing a stack of English magazines, I thumbed through them to pass the time while my wife finished preparing dinner. She, by the way, teaches pathology in the medical school of the University of... "Have you seen this magazine? Check out page 10. She said this as she placed the spoons on the plates, a victorious smile on her lips. I grabbed the magazine she mentioned and flipped to page 10, which showed a large color photo of two men, one blonde and the other darker, bald and smiling dumbly, and captioning the picture in large red font, "An Egyptian and an American vanquish zombie." Enthusiastically, my wife said, "His name is Rifat Ismail, a colleague at my university." "And what's his specialty?" "Hematology," she answered. With interest, I started reading the article, which spoke of two adventurers who faced the legend of the zombies in Jamaica, proving it was just a myth, and managed to destroy the overseer of a leper colony who was abusing his patients. As for the American, he is a computer engineer, and as for the Egyptian, who is a doctor, he claimed to have found Dracula's mummy and seen Scotland's legendary Loch Ness monster. Warily, I asked my wife, "So, is he a nutcase?" "Maybe," she said, "but he's honest and sincere and really fairly intelligent." "And did he really live these experiences?" "So they say." "And who says that?" "He does." Contemplating his features, I felt that maybe I wouldn't be totally wrong in trusting him. And who knows, maybe he's smarter than he looks. After all, he is a doctor of hematology, and could prove or refute the findings of a disease in the blood of the 5 scientists. And he has experience in the paranormal world, and I'm pretty sure he could tell us something about our dilemma here. Fate seems to have organized my seeing his photo, and I won't lose this opportunity. "Do you have his phone number?" "We have his address." "Then he's our man." And with that, General Murad sent one of his cars to bring this ghost hunter guy to us, and with it an official summons, which we wrote in a bleak way, asking him for his expert opinion. And my initial impression of him was that he was polite and rather classy, except that he was nervous and sensitive almost to the point of being ill. And he was smoking like the smokestack on a train, and I can't stand smokers. Courteously, I began explaining to him what this was all about, but he was perceptive. With Rifat Ismail, you always feel that life is like a soccer match seen many times, or a joke heard before, and he doesn't have the patience or courtesy to wait until you finish the joke. Instead, he screams in your face that he has heard it before you even open your mouth, and he always gives the impression that you can never shock him. Anyway, I introduced him to our old respected colleague in Egyptology, Mr. Muhammad Ragab, who began giving him a more detailed background on the situation. And this colleague tried to hide from Dr. Rifat the truth about the 5 bloodless corpses, but I insisted on revealing all the cards so as to let him know what awaited him. And when General Murad started explaining to him what the police knew about this incident, it seemed clear to us that he focused his thoughts on the Pharaoh curse, that curse which we realized from some of his words and his clear tension that he knew a lot about. Then came the main question. "Are you going to autopsy the mummy?" He seemed to be thinking, but I knew he would accept, as Dr. Rifat is the type of person who does not know how to say no. And also, his wish to appear civilized and unafraid of myths is enough to bring him disasters. And on January 21st, Dr. Rifat Ismail was preparing to inspect the mummy, and we could find no one to assist him except Mr. Muhammad Ragab, who tried to act brave and reasonable. And with them was a young photographer who agreed to video the autopsy with a 16mm video camera under the spotlights. And none of them expected that the gates of hell would open, and we would not be able to close them. 8. The horror returns. Rifat wore a ridiculous-looking outfit, but it was effective, and he placed a gas mask over his nose and gloves on his hand. Then he used a vacuum device and a Geiger counter to check for any radioactivity that may be present. Truth be said, he was careful, but I believed that the logical, material explanation for these events was not applicable. It was like a trial for preventing the evil eye by using an X-ray filter. He tried to eliminate all other possibilities so that if something bad happened to him the next day, it would be obvious to us that the Pharaoh curse was the reason, which is a true scientific method in experiments, based on fixing all elements except the one being tested. This man has a very organized brain, but I don't like him much, and that is my fault, not his. After a few minutes of tense waiting, we heard the sound of a body falling in the autopsy room, and we had no real explanation. It's just that we forgot to be careful and barged into the room to find Mohammed Ragab lying on the floor, while Dr. Rifat, that nutcase, continued carelessly putting the samples into his bag. He even seemed annoyed by the whole situation and said it was simply that Mohammed Ragab was hypersensitive. And he left the room, and we did the same. And in my office, Dr. Rifat came and told me, while sipping his coffee, that the mummy had no internal organs. Isn't that strange? A mummy from the 6th dynasty without guts? And we had no Kanubi vessels within the gravesite, which was unexplainable. This question ran within the corridors of my mind, but Dr. Rifat, who is not an Egyptologist, placed little importance on the topic and treated it sardonically. I placed a phone call to Dr. Shakir in the Ministry of Health Labs, instructing him to await the samples we sent to him, to check them meticulously, and to perform a long list of procedures and research as requested by Dr. Rifat. And the latter smoked heavily, unmoved by the autopsy he had performed only minutes before. Thus I tried to warn him, speaking to him about the horrible black nights awaiting him and how death would have been easier. But it had little effect, and he left as he had to go meet his fiancée. What kind of psychology does he have when he starts his day provoking a pharaoh demon and ends it in a romantic setting with his fiancée? He is either very brave or very stupid. I went home and watched television with my wife. I stared blankly at the TV while flipping pages in some book on Egyptology, hoping to find something that could shed some light, even just a little bit of light, on the situation. The Pharaoh's passion for laxatives is so strange, as is their habit of using animals, which they learned from the Abu Mihjan bird, who practices this procedure regularly using its beak. They reportedly believed that all sources of evil, spirits, and diseases were the guts, and believed that the removal of the feces was purifying, and the one with deep-seated evil inside him. This horrible sentence we found in the tomb was not a metaphor, but was actually the truth. Therefore, they removed this pharaoh's guts from his body, because they presumed the evil that moved him in this life was contained in his guts. That's why we had found no Kanubi vessels within the grave, as they had buried them far in the desert, or burned them, or threw them to the crocodiles. They hated this pharaoh, but did not dare to get rid of his body. Therefore, they buried him respectfully in the manner of his ancestors. They just covered the only thing that protected them from his evil, and I dare say that they were wrong, for this cautionary measure did not prevent him from killing the thief and the 5 scientists. The pharaohs were keen on protecting their dead, but preferred methods other than the heinous ones this evil pharaoh used. I was absorbed with some of these notions when the phone rang, so my wife rose to answer it and then came back carrying some of my clothes to brush them down, and said while sitting, "The phone is for you. They want you." I rose to answer, expecting some kind of disaster, but it was the voice of one of my assistants with the good news of a recent development. "We found the Kanubi vessels, and they're coming now from Luxor." "Whose vessels?" "Acharam's, of course." I felt the hair standing up on my arms and ice running down my spine. "What? How?" He said, "In a very small gravesite next to the original, containing 2 vessels with many inscriptions and depictions of Set, the goddess of evil, and endless warnings and curses on our heads." "And did you open the 2 vessels?" "We're not much into such things." I told him, "Then don't open them. It's forbidden, and ensure that they are safe and remain intact." "You got it," he said. "But why?" "It's a long story. Just do as I say." I then hung up and returned to my wife, asking her to prepare my clothes for going out, as I had decided to go immediately to see these two vessels. While cleaning my suit jacket, picking up something between her forefinger and thumb, she said, "Here's the proof that you have a second wife hiding behind my back." "Really?" "Yes," she said, "and apparently she works in a sugar factory." And she placed in my hand a small crystal like some kind of snowflake which had been stuck to the fabric of my woolen suit. And there were a lot of them. Of course, I don't remember where and how these particles got stuck to me, but it definitely didn't happen in a sugar factory. "Fine," I said, "and now please prep my clothes as I'm going to meet my third wife, who works in a leather factory." She helped me get dressed and tied my tie, and asked me not to be late. "Why?" I asked her. She smiled, enjoying how I had taken the bait, and said cruelly, "Because tonight is our anniversary." End of Part 5. Part 6, and the finale. "Are you going to open it now?" asked my assistant, while looking with interest at the two Kanubi vessels, as if this fool was speaking about a vessel containing expensive chocolate. I did not respond to him harshly because I was busy checking the inscriptions, looking for that particular symbol. Yes, here it is again. "The one with deep-seated evil inside him will spread horror," etc., etc. Truth be said, Amun's priests did not leave a chance for anyone to say he did not read the warnings. They fulfilled their duty meticulously, and whoever ignored these warnings afterward were personally responsible for doing so. "Will we open it now?" he repeated insistently. "Maybe it would be better to await that ghost hunter doctor's opinion." "But he is just a phony who has no idea about pharaonic history," he said disgustedly. Without being convinced of what I was saying, I responded, "He's not so bad. Plus, he is rather unfazed and unafraid of these things." "Yeah, because he doesn't know what we know." Interested, I looked at him and repeated his sentence, thinking, "Yes, he doesn't know what we know." But what do we know? And here the candle flickered from our breath as I sat with my wife in front of the small cake she had baked for our humble party. Our 10th year. No kids, no important milestones, but we are happy. And the candle of love is still lit. True, it's no longer that old volcanic fire, but has become a calm, steady flame giving us warmth and content. Gently, my little love whispered, though she was now 40 years old, "You're not bored with me yet?" "When the flowers get bored by the visit of the spring, I will get bored with you." She responded, "But I didn't give you any children." "The sun does not give birth to sons." "I didn't," she started. Damn, the ringing of the phone penetrated my last nerve. Hurrying to pick it up, I was convinced that this time there was a catastrophe. "Mohammed Ragab is dead." For a moment, I didn't know what to do or say, but then swallowed hard, saying, "Who's speaking?" "What a question! It's General Murad, of course." "And who died again?" "Mohammed Ragab, 2 hours ago." And he began relating the whole story, which, of course, ended with how the wife took the kids for an outing and stated that he was perfectly healthy, did not complain of tiredness, did not ask for a glass of water, as those who are dying usually do. Instead, she left him in front of the TV, watching and cracking up at an Ismail Yassin movie. And when she came back, he was still sitting in the same chair, in the same position, staring curiously at a boring scene about Zambia's economy in the 1960s, which raised her suspicion. And when she examined his status carefully, she realized he was no longer in our world. And it's foolish to assume that he died of boredom or hatred of Zambia. The Pharaoh had moved for a second time, but at an abnormal speed, a speed we never expected. This young man was amongst us this morning, blabbering about Acharam and assisting Dr. Rifat in the mummy's autopsy. And the latter would assure me that Ragab's fainting was not a portent of his death, and would speak to me about the vasovagal reflex and use a few Latin medical terms about which I had no clue. and I wouldn't dare at that time accuse him of a lack of intelligence. But about Dr. Rifat, is he okay? I know he lives alone, which makes him easy prey. Plus, he is the #1 candidate on our list for leaving this world next. Dialing the phone like a madman, I waited but only heard the sound of ringing echoing in his empty apartment. I had forgotten he was with his fiancée, whom I didn't know lived in Alexandria. Thus, I kept dialing the number. 9 p.m., 10, 11, and here I remembered. There was a third person at the top of our list. True, he did not disturb the Pharaoh's rest, but how could I know that Acharam was fair to that extent? I dialed Natter's number and waited with worry for a few seconds until I heard his throaty voice answering. Horrified, I said, "Natter, Mr. Raghib is dead. Don't stay alone. Please, don't stay alone." By far more horrified than me, he replied, "Dr. Ramsey, there are things I don't understand. Yes, all of this is mysterious. I'm talking about the film I shot. Is it ruined?" "No, but it shows some weird things," he said with a shaky voice. "Very weird things." 9. We have to move. "I'll look at the film tomorrow, Natter. In the meantime, don't forget my advice." When I returned to my wife, she was fast asleep as the night had been totally ruined, and our mood was ruined for several generations. I will call Dr. Rifat again during the day. As for now, I'll get some sleep. Remind me to buy some rat poison tomorrow, as the sound of their claws against the latch on the window shutters. Huge mice, apparently. I'll take care of it in the morning. As for now, I'm exhausted. So tired. At around 10 a.m., Dr. Rifat responded to my repetitive phone calls. I cordially told him what had happened the night before. I gave him the same advice I had given Nader. But with pride he said, "Caution does not prevent fate." He didn't elaborate further, but I don't blame him, and I understand to a certain degree how he feels. When being threatened by danger, calling the cops or owning a gun or keeping a dog or barricading your windows is useless against it. Isn't that terrifying? By the way, speaking of windows, you forgot to remind me to check the shutters, so I hope the mice didn't chew through part of it. The bedroom overlooked a balcony attached to the other room, which opened onto it with French doors. The balcony strung with onions hung from several nails, as in any Egyptian home which respects itself, and a couple of huge pots filled with honey sent by my relatives in Upper Egypt. Thus it seems strange for mice to attack a window surrounded by onions, as it's known that the smell of onions repels them. Even so, honey and onions? Where do those two things gather? In my balcony, of course, and where else? And here the answer came to my head, giving me a sort of electric shock. Get out, you who come in the dark and enter sneakily. This is how they would protect the child, with this spell attributed to Isis. I have sheltered him from you with the onions which harm you, and with the honey which tastes sweet in the living's mouth and bitter in the mouth of the dead. That's the solution. It wasn't mice messing with my window, but something else, something repelled by onions and honey, something the pharaohs spoke of and used to shield their children. That thing tried to force itself into my room, and I was shaken. Well then, I have taken my place on the list, me, who touched nothing and did not appear on the film. But why? At Nader's place, we sat watching the film he shot of Dr. Rifat and the late Mohammed Raghib as they autopsied the mummy. The scenes rolled by as Nader explained each scene, as the lighting was insufficient and he was unaccustomed to using a handheld video cam. Therefore, his hand was shaking to the point that the pictures almost blinded me. That's enough, Nader. Patience, he said, as here you see him removing the layers of wrappings. And here I was mesmerized. Here and there, scores of small suns lighting the screen, and Dr. Rifat picking up a few and placing them in a small paper. Ragab taking some of them and rubbing them between his fingers. Then the two of them talking, and Mohammed Ragab falling. And we entered. The scene flickered, and then darkness filled the screen and the movie ended. Only the whirring of the camera's motor. "What are these shiny particles?" I asked Nader with surprise. Returning the film to its box, he replied, "They're very tiny crystals they found, not knowing what they are. Weird thing is, they were totally inert in this setting, but after the filming, I don't understand." "Well, they are radiant with special elements picked up on the film, but undetectable by the Geiger counter," he explained. "And do they rather resemble particles of sugar?" "Kind of," he said. "But what is it? I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have I, but we went in and tried to help Ragab, so those particles stuck to our clothes like grains of wheat, and Rifat must have picked up his share of them as well." Confidently, Nader replied, "But he didn't touch them. He gathered a few of them in a small paper." "And where did he put that?" "He stuffed it into his pack of cigarettes." "And you?" I prompted. "I wasn't standing near them the whole time." And here I understood. Acharam had used a complicated method, like the method banks use in identifying robbers, with a permanent colored ink placed on some of the intended loot. Whoever opens the grave pollutes himself with these particles, and thus becomes a clear and specified target. Of whom? Of the devilish guardian of the tomb, of course. I must warn Rifat, as God only knows where he put his pack of cigarettes. As for my problem, it's far more complicated. My wife had found the crystals on my suit, clearing them with the brush, and they spread about on the carpet and everywhere, which means it's impossible to get rid of this hunting devil. I have to leave my apartment. Anyway, as a first step, I will tell Rifat. I dialed his number several times, with no use. This man doesn't enter his home except to leave it again. I tried again and again, while my wife regarded me silently. And she became convinced of my insanity when I grabbed her arm to take her to her brother's place. Going up the stairs, she said, "He will think you kicked me out." "A kicked-out wife is better than a dead wife." "I don't understand," she said. "Well, who does?" I then drove to my office. The time was nearing 11 p.m. when I entered, followed by the surprised guard. Sitting at my desk, I called an important official within the Antiquities Authority and told him the full story, and there's no reason to say he considered me crazy. "And what do you want?" he prompted. "To burn the Kanubi vessels and rebury the mummy." "And is that enough?" "It's the only solution I know." "Let me study the matter," he said. "As you know, it's Friday, and—" "Friday was not a holiday for the Pharaohs, and nothing will stop the guardian of the tomb from killing us all on a Friday." "Well, let me think about it for a couple hours." Putting down the phone, I contemplated my fingernails, and then I dialed Dr. Rifat's number. This time he picked up the phone, and I knew he was in Alex, once again, in a single day. So I asked him to come immediately to my office. "And why?" he asked. "Not to play chess, of course. This is a dangerous matter." And when Rifat arrived, accompanied by the stench of his cigarettes, we sat for about an hour exchanging our experiences. The pieces of the picture were starting to gather, and it represented the sneering, red-eyed Acharam insistent upon eliminating his opponents. Rifat now understood that scene which confused him the night before in the theater. There was something watching him, and that thing was not an illusion. And I was surprised by Rifat, knowing he did not believe in myths, but rather sees a scientific explanation at the basis of every myth. The ancients once thought that lightning was the devil's clothing, but it turned out to simply be the discharge of electricity. And the scientists believe in werewolves, not believing it was the disease porphyria. But Rifat admitted believing some of the myths, like the Loch Ness Monster, and the Assas, the demonic night watchman, and, maybe, this myth we are currently facing. And he had a measurement from which he would not deviate. Everything that contradicts firstly with religion and secondly with science is a myth. And since this science was in its infancy, then whatever contradicts with science but is accepted in religion, for example, the envious eye and black magic, exists as a probability for which science may one day find a solution as knowledge advances. Therefore, because our case concerned black magic, Dr. Riffat was willing to discuss, test, and be convinced of it, if he didn't find another way to explain it. Whereas the myths of Dracula, zombies, and Medusa found nothing but refusal from him, as they obviously contradicted with religion. His thinking is logical, and I think I would have liked this man if he were better looking, less sarcastic, and smoked less heavily. Anyway, I reached my hand toward him, asking, "Do you still have the paper?" "What paper?" "The one in which you placed the crystals, the track which the guard of the tomb is following." Casually he said, "Sure, I put it in my pack of cigarettes." "And where is that?" He seemed confused and started rifling through his pockets. It would be a disaster if he threw it in the trash, as always happens. I'm sure he did so. Then, frowning, he wiped the sweat from his glasses and said, "Just a second. I had it yesterday in the cafeteria and—" Then he bit his lower lip, saying, Yes, I remember. Hueda took it from me to prevent me from smoking." "Oh my God." Tensely, he rose and signs of understanding showed on his face as he said, "I understand. That's why she had a horrible experience with that ghost that haunted her last night. The miserable girl was carrying her death sentence in her purse and didn't know." Pointing to the phone, I said imploringly, "Well then, call her immediately." Of course, I won't describe to you our lame efforts at reaching Alexandria, scores of failed trials, until we heard the long ringing, and heard the phone being answered as Riffat screamed frantically, "Hueda, is my pack of cigarettes still in your purse?" She responded with a scream, uttering incomprehensible words. So Riffat then shouted, "Get rid of the pack immediately. Throw it from the window. There's no time to explain." She replied with something that distorted Rifat's features, and he asked, wondering, "With whom?" Not receiving a reply, he repeated frantically, "With whom, Hueda? With whom?" Curious, I drew closer to him, asking, "What's happening?" And looking at me with unseeing eyes, he said, "He's there, in her room." Jumping to the phone like someone stung, I took it from him and screamed, "Listen to me, miss." And then, "Huh? Yes, of course I want an extension on the call, damn you." No, that wasn't directed to you, miss. I was talking to the operator. Now, listen to me. Get some honey and some onions from the kitchen. No, I'm not crazy. Hurry." My shouting seemingly brought her back to her senses, and I heard her running. And I heard a strange sound like that of a door being smashed. Then I heard her picking up the phone, saying breathlessly, I have them." "Okay, then drip the honey in a circle and then stand inside it, with whoever is with you, holding the onions in your hands. Hurry! And recite any Quranic verses you know by heart. Come on." I heard noises, and the voice of a man speaking, and the rustling of the onions, and I screamed once again, "Put the phone to your ear, and drag the phone to the center of the circle so I know what's happening." "Huh? Yes, another extension, you idiot." The sound of wood breaking, sweat gathering on my forehead, and Riffat staring at me like a lost child. The sound of screams, a sound like a lion's roar, the sound of bullets being fired, and then silence. After a few moments, I heard a man's voice saying breathlessly, "It's over. It's gone." "Oh, thank God." "But who are you?" he asked, "and what's the meaning of all this?" It's a long story, and Dr. Riffat will give you the details. And Riffat took the phone from me and asked eagerly, "Are you all okay? How is Hueda?" It was a long night, Adil, really long. And he told him everything. The ending, as told by Dr. Riffat Ismail. This was the only way Dr. Ramsay's brain could figure it. Here we were standing at the opening of the huge furnace at the iron and metal works, which the authorities evacuated in preparation for what we were about to do. Dr. Ramsay carried the 2 Kanubi vessels belonging to the Pharaoh, whom we called Acharam the First, waiting on a sign from the engineer. "Now," the engineer said firmly. And at that point, Dr. Ramsay threw them in the furnace, into the raging flames reaching temperatures of 1500 degrees, and he stepped aside, and we did the same. Was that the sound of a long, heinous shriek coming from hell? Were those flaming tongues taking the shape of a tortured ghost? Was that red light the light of the end? I don't know, but we kept staring at the fire, the huge fire which melted any trace of that evil entity, the entity which stayed asleep in the vessels, inside the guts of Acharam, awaiting anyone who desecrates the grave and sticking the crystals to them so as to come out and hunt them, and bring them a heinous death after leaving an eternal print of horror on their features. The one with deep-seated evil inside him will spread horror in the hearts of the intruders. And it did. But we have destroyed his guts. So did the evil die with it? Dr. Ramsay left nothing to chance. Thus, that same day, the mummy was returned to its grave and sealed up tightly, with all guarantees taken that all the excavators and participants in this story remained silent. And when I said my goodbyes to Dr. Ramsay, I felt like I was saying goodbye to a friend. True, I didn't help him much, as usually happened whenever someone requested my expertise, but at least I didn't leave him with the memory of my being a coward or an imposter. At the hospital, Howeida was still receiving intensive treatment by the psychiatrist Dr. Assam Shalaby, and she was improving. As for her mother, she healed quickly from the shock. I dared once ask my old friend Adil about the things they saw that night, and he told me bitterly, "Don't talk to me about that ever again. Let's just forget it." Was it horrible to that extent? "As long as you live," he replied, "you won't be able to imagine." And here the psychiatrist came and told me while taking me to Hoeida's room, "You can now talk to her, but gently. What she has seen will never be erased from her mind, but she has a false cover over it." She was brave, I told him, and brought what Dr. Ramsay told her to. The load was too heavy on the engine of her soul, and that's why it burnt out. And in the room she lay, surrounded by bouquets of flowers I sent her every day, and she listened to some calm music on the radio, and read children's books, for her nerves could no longer bear anything stringent or serious. I sat next to her on the bed, confused, not knowing what to say. "Thank you for the flowers," she said gently, smiling. I reached my hand to light a cigarette, but she pulled it from me, saying, "If it weren't for your smoking, none of this would have happened. And if it weren't for you trying to prevent me from it, none of this would have happened to you." "I don't want a husband who smokes," she murmured. Staring at the ceiling, I said bitterly, "Howeida, are you sure you want to marry me? You've only seen a very small part of my life, and this is my life's soundtrack, since 1959 up until today. Will you be able to handle this?" Her head tilted so I couldn't see her face, and she went silent for a moment. And when she lifted her face, I understood the truth. She was crying in that treacherous way in which women always surprise us, crying when we least expect their tears from what we're saying. And I realized something else. I was in love. For the first time, I loved this miserable, innocent child who loved a lot, and gave all the purity of her soul to me. But I didn't get it, because the werewolves and vampires had occupied all the passages of my soul, so there was no place left for Howeida. "Howeida, would you accept?" In silence, is silence the sign of agreement or refusal? I don't remember exactly, but I still will stay with her, no matter what happens. Our wedding day was in May of that same year, but something happened, something I didn't expect, and I didn't realize at all the killer moments it would carry for me. But that's another story. Cairo, 1992. Signed, Dr. Rifat Ismail.